The restaurant was closing. I could feel it in the weight of the silence, the kind that settles after the last customer leaves and the kitchen finally goes quiet. I moved between tables on autopilot, clearing the remnants of the dinner service, my feet aching in shoes I'd worn for 7 straight hours. Stella's, a mid-range Italian place in the financial district, was my sanctuary precisely because it was unremarkable. The tips were modest. The manager didn't harass me, and nobody asked questions about why a girl like me, quiet, careful, deliberately invisible, needed a job that paid cash. I had just finished folding the napkins in the bar area when I felt it. A shift in the air. The kind of change that happens when a predator enters a room. I didn't look up immediately. Habit. "We're closed," I said, my voice soft but clear. I'd practiced being heard without seeming loud. I can see that. The voice wasn't threatening in tone. That was worse. It was smooth, almost conversational, the kind of voice that made you want to obey without understanding why. I turned. He stood in the restaurant doorway like he owned it, and later, I would learn he might have. Tall, early 40s. Dark suit tailored so perfectly it looked like armor. His eyes were the color of winter stone, and they were fixed on me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. Behind him, 2 men in matching dark jackets flanked the door. They weren't looking at him. They were looking at me. "We're really closed," I repeated, moving toward the kitchen, my movements still careful. Controlled. "Sofia Marchetti," he said. I stopped. My real name. The one I hadn't used in 2 years. When I turned back to face him, my hands were shaking slightly. I pressed them against my thighs. "How do you work Tuesdays and Thursdays. You take the 6:15 train from the stop on 8th. You live in a studio apartment above a laundromat on Morrison Street. You've never called in sick. You tip out fairly and don't socialize with the other staff." He stepped inside, and the 2 men behind him closed the door. That level of discipline isn't normal. That kind of invisibility is a choice. My throat felt dry. "I don't know who you are," I whispered. "My name is Dante Caruso." He moved further into the restaurant, and I tracked his movements like prey tracks a predator. "I own 3 buildings in this neighborhood. I eat here every Friday. Last Friday, I left an envelope of cash on the bar, a gift for the owner, Marco. It contained $30,000. The world tilted slightly. I knew about the envelope. Marco had discovered it was missing and had torn the place apart looking for it, before giving up. No, I didn't. "The security camera on the corner captures the bar," he continued, his voice still patient. "You can't see inside the restaurant from that angle, but you can see who enters and exits." Marco arrived, served me, left to check on a reservation. You cleared my table. The envelope disappeared. Nobody else entered or exited between those moments. My hands were trembling now. "I didn't take it." "You're an excellent liar," he said, and it sounded almost like admiration. "Your voice doesn't waver. Your posture remained composed, but your pupils dilated approximately 30 seconds ago. Your breathing became shallow, and you just touched your left pocket 3 times in the last minute, a micro gesture indicating stress about an object's location. I hadn't even realized I was doing it. The money was in my apartment, not stolen from the envelope. I hadn't touched the envelope. But there was money. Money I'd taken from a different job, a different life. Money that was supposed to help me disappear. Money that was supposed to be safe. "I don't have your $30,000, I said, and it was technically true. Every word crafted, careful. "I know," he said softly. "But you stole something. And now I'm curious about what." The fear should have been paralyzing. Instead, it was sharp, clarifying. I knew exactly what I was dealing with now. This man wasn't here for Marco's missing money. He'd figured out who I really was, what I was really doing, and he was playing with me the way cats play with things they've caught. I reached into my pocket. His men stiffened, but I wasn't reaching for a weapon. I was reaching for my phone. I dialed the number I'd memorized 3 years ago but never used. The number for the woman I'd promised I would call if things went wrong. The number for my federal handler. Special Agent Catherine Chen answered on the second ring. "This is Marchetti," I said quietly. "I'm compromised." For one perfect moment, one crystalline, Suspended second, I watched Dante Caruso's entire expression change. Not anger, not fear. Something far more complicated. His eyes widened fractionally, and his mouth tightened, and he looked at me like I'd just pulled back the curtain on a magic trick he'd believed in for 30 years. "Where are you?" Chen's voice was immediate, professional. "Stella's, 8th and Morrison. There's a man here. He says his name is Dante Caruso. He owns property in the neighborhood. Stay on the line. FBI is 2 minutes out." I watched him process that word. FBI. The way it landed was like watching someone realize they'd been running toward a cliff they couldn't see. He said nothing, but his hand moved slightly toward one of the men behind him, a gesture that contained entire conversations I wasn't meant to understand. "Don't," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "They're minutes away. You have time to leave. Why would you tell me that?" His voice was different now, harder, a predator's edge showing through the silk. I didn't have an answer. Or rather, I had too many answers, and none of them made sense. "I don't know," I whispered. The sirens started in the distance. He looked at me for a long moment, not at my face. Exactly, but through it, like he was reading something written beneath the skin. Then he nodded once to the men behind him. They left. Quickly but without panic, moving like water finding its level. He stayed for 3 more seconds, 3 seconds, in which he looked at me with something I couldn't name, something that felt almost like recognition. Then he was gone, leaving only the ghost of his cologne and the weight of what he now knew. The FBI arrived 6 minutes later. The safe house was a nondescript apartment in a building that blended into the Brooklyn skyline like smoke. Chen had been furious for exactly 3 hours, and then she'd stopped bothering with anger and moved straight into crisis management. "You compromised a 3-year embedded position," she said for the 7th time, which meant she was cycling through her anger again. 3 years, Marchetti. Do you understand what we were building?" I was sitting on a folding chair in the kitchen of the safe house, which smelled like industrial cleaner and resignation. "He knew who I was before the money," I said. "He'd already figured it out. The phone call didn't change anything about... It changed everything." Chen slammed her hand on the table, and I didn't flinch. "We'd done this dance enough times. He now knows you're connected to federal law enforcement. He knows we have interest in him. He knows. He didn't run." She paused, her coffee cup halfway to her mouth. "What?" "I told him the FBI was coming. He had time to leave the state, go underground, disappear. He didn't. He just left. Calmly, like it didn't matter." Chen set down her cup slowly. "That's worse," she said finally. "That's so much worse. That means he doesn't see you as a threat, which means he sees you as something else." I didn't ask what that something else was. 3 days later, I found out that Dante Caruso didn't have a criminal record. Not in America, anyway. He was registered as a real estate developer and art collector. His businesses appeared legitimate. His finances were immaculate. The properties he owned had all the required permits. But Chen had a file. A thick file that didn't make it into official court records. His father was Luciano Caruso, she said, spreading photographs across the table. Dante's father, I learned, had been the kind of organized crime boss that federal agencies whispered about after hours. He was dead now, poisoned, supposedly, though nothing was ever proven. Dante had been in Switzerland when it happened. The son kept the operation running, Chen continued, but changed the whole structure. Nobody can prove anything. The cases we've built always fall apart. Witnesses recant. Evidence disappears. The man is careful to the point of obsession. Then why do you care about him? Because the organization he runs generates approximately $200 million a year in illicit activity. Drug trafficking, money laundering, human trafficking, arms dealing. We know it's happening. We just can't touch him. So why was I undercover at a restaurant? Chen was quiet for a moment. We were hoping to turn the staff. We were hoping one of the people close to Caruso would slip, would get loose in the wrong bar, would make the mistake that would give us leverage. She looked at me. Instead, you went deep cover for 3 years and didn't discover anything because you were too focused on being invisible. That stung, because it was true. I was moved 3 more times in the next month. Different cities, different identities. But the fear didn't go away. The feeling of exposure, of being hunted, of knowing that somewhere out there, Dante Caruso was thinking about me. It was the 7th day of the 4th move when I found the note. I was living in a studio apartment in Philadelphia under the name Elena Rossi. The note had been slipped under my door, and it was written on expensive paper in careful handwriting. You shouldn't have called them, but I'm grateful you did. That was all it said. I called Chen immediately. She had the apartment swept for bugs clean. She had the building checked for surveillance, nothing visible. She tried to keep me there. But I could see the fear in her eyes now. The fear that told me Dante Caruso had just proven he could reach me anywhere. The next note arrived 2 days later in a different city. You're still the best liar I've ever met. And then another, 3 days after that. Even when you're telling the truth. I stopped calling Chen after the 4th one. She was panicking, reassigning agents, trying to build a protection protocol that everyone knew would fail if he really wanted to get to me. And I realized something that should have terrified me but instead felt almost like relief. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He was trying to communicate. The notes became a pattern. One every few days, always reaching me in ways that shouldn't have been possible. They were brief, cryptic, sometimes almost tender. Your favorite tea is chamomile. You drink it at night when you're afraid. You whisper songs in Italian when you think no one can hear. I recognize your accent. You're from the north. I'm curious about what you're running from. It's not the FBI. It's something older. He was dissecting me, cataloging me, building a map of my interior that felt more intimate than physical contact ever could. By the 8th note, I wasn't afraid anymore. I was something worse. I was waiting for the next one. Chen noticed the shift in my behavior and tried to send me back to training, tried to offer me a desk job, tried to convince me that this was textbook grooming behavior and I was experiencing trauma bonding. Maybe she was right, but when the 9th note arrived with an address and a simple message, the coffee shop on 9th. Tomorrow, noon. Just coffee. I didn't turn it in to the FBI. I went. The coffee shop was deliberately public, which made it almost worse. Civilian witnesses meant constraints on both sides, meant he wanted to talk more than he wanted to threaten. He was already there, sitting at a corner table with a clear view of both exits. 2 cups of coffee. One black, one with cream. He remembered how I drank it. A detail from the restaurant. A detail I'd forgotten I'd let show. When I sat down across from him, I realized I was trembling. You've been moving constantly, he said, and it wasn't a question. Safe houses in 7 different cities, new names every 2 weeks. The FBI believes I'm hunting you, but you knew better. You knew I could reach you any time I wanted. Why didn't you? I asked. Because you interested me. He pulled a photograph from his jacket and slid it across the table. It was me from before, from the life I'd run from, younger, softer, with hair I'd cut short after everything fell apart. Sophia Marchetti, only child of 2 academics. Father was Italian, professor of Renaissance history. Mother was Korean, taught literature. Both died in an accident when you were 22. Stop. Car accident. Official report said the brakes failed. Unofficial investigation by interested parties suggested otherwise. He pushed another photograph forward. A different car. My parents' car. The accident happened the day after your father tried to report something to the police. A shipment from the university art history department. Pieces that weren't in the original collection. I couldn't breathe. Nobody knew this. Nobody except me and the people who'd killed them. Who are you really? I whispered. The answer to your question is complicated, he said. The simple version is that I'm the man who killed the people who killed your parents. The coffee shop continued its existence around us. People laughed. Cups clinked. Music played from hidden speakers. None of it was real. The only real thing was Dante Caruso sitting across from me with death in his eyes and revelation in his voice. When did you... I couldn't finish the question. 3 months after your parents died. You'd disappeared by then. I found you later, years later, after you'd already contacted federal law enforcement and started cooperating. I've been watching you run toward safety ever since. He leaned back in his chair, the picture of leisure. You were trying to get the people responsible for their deaths arrested. You gave the FBI everything you knew, And it wasn't enough. Because the people involved were connected, and connected people disappear from evidence like smoke. So you killed them, I said flatly. I killed them very carefully, and very slowly, and in ways that would never be connected to me. His voice was still conversational. By the time the FBI figured out what was happening, there was nobody left to arrest. I felt tears sliding down my cheeks. When had those started? Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know the truth. Because the FBI has been using your grief as a tool for 3 years, and they're never going to get what you actually need, which is closure. He pulled out his phone and slid it across the table. On the screen was a photograph of a man I didn't recognize. This is Marco Volante. He gave the order to have your parents killed. He died of a heart attack 6 months ago while being questioned about his financial records. The doctors said it was surprising given his age, but heart attacks happen. I stared at the photograph. Did you? No, that was someone else's work. But I made sure the message was clear that there would be consequences. He took the phone back. The others involved? They've died since your father reported them. Car accidents, drowning, one fell off a building. Each one natural, each one unprovable, each one justice. That's not justice, I heard myself say. That's just more death. And yet your parents are still gone, he replied. Tell me, does legality matter when the legal system has failed you? I didn't have an answer to that question. He stood, leaving cash on the table for the coffee neither of us had drunk. You have a choice, he said. You can go back to the safe houses and the false names, spending years watching over your shoulder, never being safe because the people who hurt you are still connected to people who have reasons to hate you. Or you can accept that safety has its own currency, and it usually requires trusting someone with power. And in exchange? I asked. In exchange? Nothing. Not yet. I don't work in transactions. I work in patterns. I pattern match behavior, intention, loyalty. You've spent 3 years proving yourself to the FBI, to yourself, to the people watching you. You've been honest even when it hurt. That's rare. He walked toward the door, then paused. The choice is yours, Sophia. But know that whatever you decide, I've already decided about you. After he left, I sat in that coffee shop for 40 minutes, watching the foam dissolve in the cold coffee, and tried to figure out what had just happened. He'd given me the answer to my grief. He'd given me closure I never expected to find. And he'd made it absolutely clear that he didn't need anything from me except my presence, which was somehow the most dangerous thing of all. The FBI pulled me in 3 days later. A federal safe house in Washington, D.C. Chen was there with 2 agents I'd never seen before, and everyone was very tense. You met with Caruso, Chen said flatly. I didn't bother denying it. He gave you information. Classified information about ongoing investigations. There are no ongoing investigations, I replied. There are closed cases and dead suspects, and nothing anyone can prove. You're compromised, one of the new agents said. His name was Morrison, I think. This is textbook recruitment. He's building your emotional dependency, so he can leverage you later. Leverage me how? I'm nobody. I have no access to classified material. I can't help his organization in any way. I'm literally useless to him. Exactly, Chen said quietly, which is why we think this is personal. I didn't like that either. For the next 2 weeks, I was held in a safe house while they decided what to do with me. The bureau was split. Some agents wanted to turn me into a double agent, feeding Caruso false information. Others wanted to give me a new life entirely, somewhere far away, where he wouldn't find me. Neither option felt real. On the 14th day, there was an incident at the safe house, an attempted breach at 3 a.m. Men in dark clothing moved across the property with professional efficiency. They didn't try to shoot anyone. They just demonstrated that they could have, if they'd wanted to. The FBI response was chaotic. The safe house was abandoned. I was moved again, and the moves became more frequent, more desperate. Caruso had just proven that he could reach me anywhere, anytime. That he'd chosen not to kill anyone was almost worse than if he had, because it meant he was making a point. And the point was that I had nowhere to run. Chen finally admitted it 3 weeks in. He's hunting you, she said, and I could hear the defeat in her voice. Not to kill you, to take you. And we can't stop him. So what do you want me to do? I asked. We want you to walk away. Resign from the bureau. Leave us. Go somewhere he can find you." She paused. "And if he asks questions about the FBI, about our operations, about anything at all, you cooperate. You tell us what he asks, and we might be able to build something with that intelligence." "So I'm bait," I said. "Yes," she confirmed, without flinching. "But you're a live bait, and I'd prefer to keep you that way." I signed the paperwork that would sever my 3-year connection to federal law enforcement. They set me up with a new apartment in Chicago, a real one, registered under my real name, Sophia Marchetti, in a building downtown with good security and discreet management. They knew Caruso would find me there. That was the point. What I didn't expect was how quickly he would. I'd been in the Chicago apartment for exactly 4 days when he arrived. It was evening, and I was making pasta from scratch, a holdover from before, from when my life was normal enough that I could afford habits. When the knock came at my door, I knew who it was before I looked. Through the peephole, I could see him dark suit. No men with him this time, just the lethal grace of someone moving through the world with the assumption that nothing could stop him. I opened the door. "Hello, Sophia," he said. And despite everything, the fear, the confusion, the knowledge that I was being used and that he knew I was being used, I stepped back and let him inside. He moved through my apartment like he was appraising a property, looked at my books, my kitchen, the soft throw blanket on the couch. The space was small but intentional. I'd started building myself again, slowly, item by item. "The FBI wants you to spy on me," he said finally. "Yes. They believe that if you're close enough, you might overhear something, see something, learn something that would help them build a case." "Yes." He turned to face me, and his expression was almost sad. "That will never happen," he said. "Not because I'm careful, though I am, but because I'm not going to tell you anything about my business. And more importantly, you're not going to tell the FBI anything about me." "How can you be sure?" "Because of this." He stepped closer, and his hand came up to my face. His fingers were cold against my cheek. "Because you've already decided. Maybe not consciously, but you've decided." "Decided what?" I whispered. "That you want to be saved more than you want to be free." And God help me, he was right. The part of me that was still FBI training, still thinking like an agent, screamed that I should be documenting this, recording this, using every second to gather intelligence. But that part had been quiet for a long time now. It had gone quiet somewhere around the 3rd note. Somewhere around the moment he told me he'd killed the people who killed my parents. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now? Now you stop calling the FBI. You stop meeting with your handler. You stop being bait." His thumb traced my cheekbone, gentle but absolute. "Now you decide if you're willing to let me take care of you. Not because you love me, not yet, but because you trust that I can. And if I say no, then I'll help you disappear. I have resources that even the FBI doesn't know about. You could be anyone, anywhere, safe." He paused. "But you won't say no." He was right about that too. The worst part was that I could feel myself surrendering before I'd made the decision. My body was already saying yes to his protection, to his certainty, to the strange safety I'd found in a dangerous man who didn't hide what he was. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted. "Yes, you do. You've been doing it since the moment you called the FBI and realized that calling them meant telling me who you were." His hand fell away, and I felt the loss of it like a physical ache. "You've been making choices that led you here. Now you just have to keep making them." He moved toward the door. "Wait," I said. "You're leaving?" "I'm leaving. You need time to truly decide, not just to surrender." He opened the door. "When you're ready, call me." He left a number written on the back of an art auction catalog, something beautiful, something that felt too perfect to be real. And I was alone in my apartment, holding a phone number, knowing I was about to betray the FBI, knowing I was about to walk into something darker and more complicated than I'd ever imagined, knowing that I'd never been more willing to do it. I called the number after 3 days of silence. He answered on the first ring, like he'd been waiting. "I'm ready," I said. "I know. I'll send someone to collect you." The car arrived an hour later, a black luxury sedan with tinted windows and a driver who didn't speak. I left behind everything I couldn't carry. The apartment was already being cleaned, I later learned, Any trace of me would be erased so thoroughly that the FBI would find nothing but echoes. The driver took me to a building I recognized from photographs, one of Caruso's legitimate properties. A high-rise in downtown Chicago, all glass and steel, and contained violence. I was taken to the top floor and left in an office that smelled like mahogany and old money. Dante arrived 30 minutes later, and the space seemed to shrink around him. "I need you to understand something," he said, without preamble. "You're not safe because I've decided to protect you. You're safe because you're no longer exposed. The FBI has lost their leverage on you, and your position with them now would be so compromised that you're worthless to them. You've made yourself invisible all over again. By being with you," I said. "By choosing me." He moved to the window, looking out at the city below. "That's the only currency I accept. Choice. Not coercion. Not leverage. Choices made with full knowledge of the cost. And what's the cost? You become my responsibility. That means danger touches you differently. People who might have used you before will now approach you as a way to hurt me. You accept that I'll be violent when necessary, and you don't judge me for it. You accept that I have a business, and some aspects of that business are outside the law." He turned back to face me. "And you don't run, even when you want to, even when you're afraid. How do you know I won't run?" "Because I can read people with reasonable accuracy, and you're someone who stays." He gestured toward a door on the far side of the office. "There's an apartment adjoining this office. You'll stay there. You don't go out alone. You don't contact anyone from your previous life. You become someone new. Someone owned," I said quietly. "Someone protected," he corrected. "But yes, someone who belongs to me, in the way that precious things belong to collectors. You'll be cared for, you'll be safe, and in return, you'll be visible only to me." The apartment was beautiful in a way that felt impersonal, all neutral colors and expensive furniture, like someone had consulted a designer and asked for luxury, without specifying home. But it was the office adjoining it that made my breath catch. It was a library, floor-to-ceiling books, a fireplace, comfortable chairs, windows overlooking the city. And on one shelf, carefully arranged, were my books, the ones I'd left in the safe house, the ones I'd bought new. "How did you—" "I had your apartment packed while you were deciding," he said from the doorway. "Everything that mattered to you is here now." I stood in the middle of the library, my library, because that's what it was now, and felt something shift inside my chest. Terror, or surrender, or the moment a bird recognizes the cage, is more comfortable than the sky. The first week was strange. Dante maintained a careful distance. He was in the office during the day, dealing with business I wasn't privy to. I was free to move within the apartment, within the library. But when I asked about leaving the floor, he simply said, "Not yet." He would emerge for dinner meals he either prepared himself or had brought in. We'd eat in the library, and he'd ask me questions about books, about art, about my parents' academic interests. He was mapping my interior with careful precision, learning what made me think, what made me feel, what made me become something other than the invisible girl I'd been. "Your mother wrote on medieval literature," he said one evening. "Your father specialized in Italian Renaissance. That's why you're so interested in power dynamics in art. You've been studying dominance and submission your entire life through historical analysis." "Is that a character flaw?" I asked. "It's a preparation," he replied. "You were being trained for this without knowing it. The knowledge, the study, the careful observation of how power works in controlled environments. It was all leading here." By the second week, he began bringing me with him to the office. Not for meetings, I was never included in those, but I'd sit in a corner, reading, while he conducted business. I learned not to acknowledge the people who came and went, learned not to look at faces or hear conversations I wasn't meant to understand. I became part of the office landscape, and somehow that felt more intimate than anything physical. On the 15th day, he asked me to sit beside him during a meeting. It was a small shift, but it meant something. One of the men, Russian accent, scar tissue around his eyes, made a comment in Russian. Dante's expression hardened in a way that made the entire room go silent. "She," Dante said in quiet, perfect Russian, "is not the kind of woman you make comments about. She is the kind of woman you pretend you never noticed existed." The man apologized immediately. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the message. Later, in the library, I asked Dante what the man had said. Something crude about your appearance and your obvious inexperience. And you defended my honor? There was something almost teasing in my voice, a lightness that surprised me. I established boundaries, he corrected. You're mine. That means people follow rules about how they interact with you. It's not about honor, it's about ownership. He said it like he was explaining a business arrangement, and maybe that's what it was. But when he pulled me close, his hand in my hair, his forehead touching mine, it didn't feel like business. Do you hate that? He asked softly. That I claim you like a possession? No, I whispered, which was terrifying and true in equal measure. Good. His lips brushed mine, the ghost of a kiss. Because I plan on being very possessive. But he didn't kiss me, not then. Instead, he held me in the darkness of the library, and I could feel the restraint in his body, the way he was holding himself back. When? I asked. When you ask, he replied. Not before. Not ever before you ask. That night, I lay in the apartment's bedroom, my bedroom now, decorated with my books and my things, and understood that I was waiting for something, that the waiting itself had become a kind of intimacy, that desire deferred was a form of touch. And I understood why he was making me wait, because he was teaching me that my choice mattered more than his hunger, that in a relationship built on power, the most revolutionary thing I could do was consent slowly, deliberately, with full knowledge that I could change my mind. It was 3 weeks before I asked. It happened in the library, like almost everything important had started to. Dante was reading something in Italian, poetry, I think, and I was curled in the chair opposite him, not actually reading despite the book in my hands. I'd been watching him for an hour, the way the light caught in his dark eyes, the sharp focus of his attention even in stillness. I can feel you watching me, he said, without looking up from his page. Is that a problem? No. He closed his book slowly. But it's dangerous. For you. Why? He looked at me then, and something in his expression had shifted. The control was still there, but underneath it was something raw. Because I've been very careful not to touch you, he said. And I'm running out of reasons why. My breath caught. You said when I ask. I know what I said. He stood, and the movement was tense with something held back. But you're not asking. You're looking at me like you want something, but you're afraid to name it. I am asking, I said quietly. I'm asking now. That's not asking, Sophia. That's surrendering. He moved toward me, and I watched him come closer. Watched the careful distance he maintained. I need you to say exactly what you want, he continued. Not what you'll accept. Not what you think you're supposed to want. What you actually want. I don't know, I admitted. I don't. I've never. I know. His hand came up to my face, and I leaned into it like a plant toward sunlight. Which is why I need you to say it. So you know that you chose this. So when this is over, when we move forward, you can never tell yourself that I forced you. I stopped, my voice shaking slightly. I want you to touch me. I don't know what I want, exactly, but I want something from you. He kissed me before I could finish, and it was everything the previous weeks of restraint had promised, and nothing like what I'd expected. His hand was gentle in my hair, but his kiss was deep, insistent, the kiss of someone who'd been holding back and was finally releasing the pressure. I made a small sound that I barely recognized, and he pulled back slightly. That sound, he said against my lips. Don't forget that sound. That's what you sound like when you want something. Dante, come with me. He took my hand and led me to the bedroom. His bedroom, I realized. The one I'd never been allowed inside. It was larger than the one I'd been sleeping in, decorated in dark wood and soft linens. Utterly masculine. He pulled me inside and closed the door, and suddenly the space felt very small. I need to tell you something, he said, his forehead against mine. And you need to hear it before this goes any further. I was trembling. Okay. I've been alone for a very long time. Not physically alone. I've had relations, but alone in the way that matters. No one I trusted enough to let see me. He pulled back to look at me. That changes with you. I don't know why. I've tried to maintain distance, and I can't. You're under my skin. Is that good or bad? I asked. It's complicated, he said. It means you have power over me. Not the kind of power I have over you, but power nonetheless. It means if anything happened to you, I would burn the world. It means... He stopped, and his expression became something almost vulnerable. It means I've already decided that losing you is not an option I'll accept. I reached up and touched his face, my palm against his cheek. I don't know how to do this, I whispered. How to be with someone. How to... I know. That's okay. His hand covered mine. We'll learn together. He undressed me slowly, and I was shaking the entire time. Not from fear, but from the overwhelming sensation of being truly seen. Every piece of exposed skin felt like vulnerability, and he treated each revelation like something sacred. You're beautiful, he said simply, when I was fully unclothed. But that's not why I'm doing this. I'm doing this because I need to know every part of you. He moved with the same careful control he'd demonstrated in everything else. But it felt different now. Not restraint, but intention. His hands mapped my body like he was learning a language, and I was learning to answer in the trembling of my breath, the arch of my spine, the way I reached for him even as fear whispered that I should pull away. When he entered me, it was slow enough that I could accommodate him, gentle enough that I could understand this was happening, overwhelming enough that I forgot everything except the feeling of him. Breathe, he murmured against my neck. Just breathe. You're safe. I realized I'd been holding my breath. He moved inside me with careful attention, reading my body like he read people, adjusting his pace and pressure based on my responses. There was no performance here, no pretense, just the physical reality of vulnerability and trust. And then, something shifted. The fear that had been underneath everything softened into something else, a kind of opening, an acceptance. I started to move with him instead of waiting for him to move into me, and he made a sound that might have been satisfaction. That's it, he murmured. That's beautiful. The intensity built slowly, not toward the kind of explosion I'd read about in books, but toward something that felt more like surrender, like falling toward something soft and inevitable. When it came, it wasn't dramatic. It was a gentle unraveling, a sense of rightness, a moment where my body and my mind and my heart seemed to align into something unified. He followed seconds after, and he held me so tightly I could barely breathe, burying his face in my hair. Afterward, we lay in the darkness, and he held me against his chest, his arm across my body in a gesture that felt both protective and possessive. I need you to understand something, he said quietly. What just happened that was me showing you something true about myself? That was vulnerability, and I don't do vulnerability for people who don't matter. I know, I whispered. You matter, he continued. You matter in a way that's inconvenient and complicated and potentially very dangerous, but you matter. I fell asleep to the sound of his heartbeat, and for the first time in 3 years, I didn't dream about running. The weeks that followed were a slow dissolving of boundaries, not the boundaries Dante maintained, but my own, the ones I'd built to survive. I'd been the girl who was invisible, whose job was to take up no space, whose presence registered only as empty air. Now I was the girl Dante looked at when he entered a room, the girl he touched in public, his hand on my lower back, claiming visible territory, the girl who belonged to him, and somehow that possession felt like freedom. We developed a routine that felt almost domestic. He'd work in the office, and I'd read in the library or I'd sit in his office doing research on art history, a subject he wanted me to understand, because it was the language his world sometimes spoke in. Important pieces moved through channels, and money flowed along aesthetic lines that took the place of explicit conversation. The business uses art as camouflage, he explained one evening, showing me catalogs. Legitimate collectors mix with people who are buying pieces to hide capital. An 8th century illuminated manuscript that should be in a museum instead moves to someone who needs to move money across continents. The painting authenticates the movement. I looked at the manuscripts, the paintings, the sculptures. So the art is just cover? I asked. The art is never just anything, he replied. But yes, it serves multiple purposes, form and function, beauty and utility, like everything worth having. He was looking at me when he said that, and I felt the weight of his attention like pressure. The violence came in week 6, introduced like a piece of art into a carefully arranged space. Dante came back to the apartment with blood on his shirt. Just a small amount, mostly on the cuff. I was reading when he emerged from the office, and I looked up with a calmness I didn't feel. "Are you hurt?" I asked. "No." He was already removing the shirt, moving toward the shower. I handled a situation. I didn't ask what situation. I'd learned not to ask direct questions about the business. But later, when he was holding me in the darkness, I felt the need to understand. "The blood," I said softly. I didn't kill anyone, if that's what you're asking," he replied. "I had a conversation with a man who wasn't listening. The blood was his, not mine. Will there be more conversations like that?" "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "Does that bother you?" I should have lied. The intelligent thing would have been to pretend I was disturbed, to maintain some moral high ground. But I was past that. "No," I admitted. "It doesn't." He pulled me closer, and his voice held something like relief. "Good, because I won't stop. Not for you, not for anyone. But I needed to know that you understand that. The business was violent sometimes." I began to grasp the scope of it, slowly, money laundering through restaurants and casinos, drug distribution through networks I never fully understood, protection rackets and blackmail and things I deliberately didn't ask about. And through it all, Dante moved with a kind of elegant control, making decisions that had life and death consequences while remaining emotionally unmoved. Except with me. With me, there was a crack in that control. I noticed it the day a man came to the office and brought news that someone had tried to approach me. One of Caruso's rivals had apparently instructed an associate to follow me, to gather information about my habits and connections. The office went very quiet when Dante heard about it. And then he did something I'd never seen before. He lost his composure. His hand swept across the table, sending papers and a coffee cup to the floor. His voice, when he spoke, carried a kind of barely contained fury. "Find him," he said to the men in his office. "Find everyone connected to him. I want to know his suppliers, his family, his children's school names. I want to know everything about how he exists in the world." After they left, he found me in the library. "You're going to have security," he said, and it wasn't a request. "Close, personal, everywhere you go." "Dante, I don't need. You do need." His control was back, but it was stretched thin over something very dangerous. "Someone tried to use you against me. That means someone is very, very stupid. And stupidity that threatens you is stupidity that I eliminate." 2 days later, I learned that the man had been found. The details were kept from me, but I understood from the muted conversations and the careful avoidance that something final had happened. Dante didn't mention it, but when he touched me that night, it was with an intensity that bordered on desperation. "Promise me something," he said. We were in bed, and his voice was rough. "Promise me that you understand you can't leave. Not now. Not ever. I've crossed lines with you, used you, claimed you that I can't uncross." "I'm not trying to leave," I whispered. "You will," he said. "At some point you'll realize what you've done, and you'll try. And I need to know that even then, you'll stay." "Why would I try to leave?" He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. "Because you're starting to understand what it means to be involved with me. Because the danger isn't abstract anymore. Because you're smart enough to know that loving me is a liability." He paused. "And because I've done things that, if you fully understood them, would terrify you." "Have you done things?" I asked carefully. "To me?" "Yes," he admitted. "Small manipulations. I had the FBI agents monitoring you identified, and I ensured they would be reassigned. I had a judge recuse himself from your case because I knew his preferences would work against your interests. I touched your life in dozens of ways to make sure you'd be vulnerable enough to accept my protection. I should have been angry. Instead, I felt something like understanding. You didn't do anything the FBI wasn't already planning to do, I said. You just did it first. That doesn't make it less of a betrayal, he replied. No, I agreed, but it makes it honest. Which is more than the FBI ever gave me. He turned to face me in the darkness. You're dangerous, he said softly. Do you know that? You have the ability to make me compromise things I've protected for decades. My isolation, my certainty, my complete control. You make me want things I've trained myself not to want. What things? I asked. A future, a continuity, someone who knows all of me and chooses to stay anyway. I reached out and found his hand in the darkness. Then let me choose, I said. Don't manipulate it. Don't control it. Just let me choose. He brought my hand to his mouth, and his kiss against my palm felt like a vow. I will, he promised. From now on, I choose. But you have to be willing to choose the same things I do, Sophia. You have to be willing to be this with me permanently, without the option of return. I am, I said, and meant it. The danger had stopped being a warning. It had become a promise. The attack came on a Tuesday evening in November. I was supposed to be shopping, my first outing without Dante since I'd come into his world. My bodyguards, two discreet men who moved like they were part of my shadow, remained at a distance as I moved through a high-end boutique in the Gold Coast neighborhood. I remember thinking about what color of dress to buy, completely mundane, completely distracted. The first explosion registered as sound before my brain could process it as danger. The windows of a building across the street erupted into bright fire, and the bodyguards were moving before the glass stopped falling. Car, now, one of them said, his hand on my shoulder. We were in the vehicle for maybe 30 seconds before my phone rang. Dante's number. Are you hurt? His voice was sharp, cutting through the emergency sirens like a blade. No, I'm in the car. They got me out. I know. Keep them with you. Don't leave that vehicle. Don't speak to police. I'm handling this. The line went dead. The building that had exploded was a restaurant, one of Dante's legitimate businesses, but more importantly, a place where he often took meetings. The question wasn't whether this was an attack. The question was what his response would be. By the time we pulled into the underground garage of his building, the news was reporting deaths. 2 of his men, 1 civilian server, 1 of the kitchen staff who'd been dating one of his associates. Dante was in the office when I entered, and the entire space had transformed. It was no longer a place of business. It was a war room. Men moved with purpose. Phones rang constantly. There was a map of the city on his desk with red marks indicating locations. When he saw me, he stood immediately. Are you hurt? He asked, coming around the desk. No, I'm okay. You're not okay. His hands came up to my face, checking for injuries, his touch both gentle and thorough. You were on that street when it happened. I wasn't in the building. That was by chance, he said harshly. You could have been. That means someone miscalculated, or someone was trying to prove they could get close. He turned to one of the men waiting nearby. Find out who did this, he said quietly. And when you find them, I want them alive. I want them to understand exactly what happens when someone threatens her. In the days that followed, I watched something I'd read about but never truly understood. The machinery of Dante's organization in full motion. Rivals were investigated. Alliances were leveraged. Messages were sent through channels I couldn't quite track, some delivered in conversation, some delivered in violence, some delivered simply through the fear of what might happen next. I stayed in the apartment, forbidden from going out, and watched the city from the windows while my lover orchestrated the response to an attack that had been meant to hurt him but had taken anyone I cared about. The problem was, I realized, I didn't actually care about the people who'd been hurt. I barely knew them. What I cared about was that Dante was furious in a way I'd never seen before, that his control, usually absolute, was fraying at the edges. On the 4th day, he came to me in the library and told me they'd found the people responsible. The hit was ordered by the Russo family, he explained. But it was carried out by freelance contractors. The Russos wanted to prove they could move against me without direct consequence. They wanted to destabilize. What are you going to do? I asked. He was quiet for a moment. I'm going to go get my hands dirty, he said finally. And I need you to understand something about me before I do. What? That I'm not a good man. I've never pretended to be. But when I'm in that phase, when I'm handling problems through violence, I'm not the person you sleep beside. I'm someone else. Someone the world needs me to be sometimes. Okay, I said. You say that like you understand, but you don't. You can't, unless you see it. He moved toward the door. Do you want to see it? The reasonable thing would have been to say no. The intelligent thing would have been to keep the fiction of his duality intact, to maintain the separation between the tender man in my bed and the ruthless man he was in business. "Yes," I said. "I want to see." The warehouse on the warehouse district was empty except for 4 men, and the 2 I assumed were the contractors responsible for the bombing. Dante brought me there. I didn't ask how he'd convinced me to come. I'd been asking less and less questions these days, simply following because where he led felt like the only direction worth moving. The men noticed my entrance with surprise, a ripple of confusion across their faces. "She wants to understand what I am," Dante said conversationally. "So she's going to watch." What happened next wasn't theatrical. It wasn't the kind of violence you see in films. It was methodical, professional, and absolutely devastating in its precision. Dante extracted information through pain, through threat, through the complete dissolution of hope. I watched him break a man's fingers one at a time. I watched him burn another man's skin with a cigarette lighter. I watched his face remain completely blank while he did these things, while he whispered promises of worse things to come if the answers weren't satisfactory. And I realized something that should have terrified me, but instead felt almost like relief. I didn't hate him for it. I didn't judge him. I understood that this was necessary, that this was how you maintained power, that this was the cost of safety in the world he inhabited. When it was over, when the men had been disposed of, and the warehouse had been cleaned, he took me to a private bathroom and cleaned the blood from his hands. "Do you hate me?" he asked, not looking at me. "No," I said, and meant it. "You should." He finally looked at me, and his eyes were hollow. "You should be afraid of me now." "I was always afraid of you," I replied. "But fear isn't the same as judgment. Fear is understanding the truth about someone." He pulled me close, pressing me against him, and for the first time, I felt like I was the one holding him together. Later, in the darkness of his bed, he confessed the depths of his obsession. "I had people watching you before I even met you," he said, "for years. I was already interested in the Marchetti case because of the art connection your father was reporting on pieces that were being moved through channels I used. But then I saw you, and I became interested in a different way. I should have felt violated. Instead, I felt chosen. I wrote a file on you," he continued. "Detailed, obsessive. Every class you took, every book you checked out of the library, every person you spoke to. I know you better than you know yourself, Sophia. I've been studying you like you're a masterpiece." "Is that why you're with me?" I asked. "Because you've been planning this?" "No." His voice was absolutely certain. "I was with you because of that, but I've stayed because of who you are now. Who you're becoming with me. The planning is over. What's left is just us." The next morning, the news reported that the Russo family had suffered significant losses in a mysterious incident. No arrests were made. No charges were filed. Justice, when it came quietly and without the interference of law enforcement. And I understood that this was my initiation, not into romance, but into the full reality of what loving Dante Caruso meant. It meant accepting that the men who had tried to hurt me were gone. It meant understanding that blood had been spilled on my behalf. It meant knowing that my safety came at a cost I would never fully pay. But I stayed anyway. Because by then, I'd stopped trying to separate the man who held me at night from the man who'd destroyed my enemies. They were the same person, and I loved both. The FBI came for me on the first Tuesday of December. Chen and 2 federal agents appeared at the building with a warrant and the cold determination of law enforcement that had finally found their opening. They wanted me to testify. They wanted me to be a witness to Dante's crimes, to the violence I'd seen, to the confessions he'd made. They wanted me to betray him in the way I'd been trained to. Dante watched me prepare to leave without protest. That was the strange part. I'd expected anger, or possessiveness, or force. Instead, he simply held me and told me the truth. "I knew this would happen eventually," he said. "This is always the test, Sophia. Everyone has a moment where they choose between safety and loyalty. This is yours." "I won't testify," I said. "You might have to. You might not have a choice." He pulled back to look at me. "And if you do testify, if you choose your safety over me, I need to know that I understand your decision." "I won't," I repeated. "I won't betray you. You say that now. But when they offer you immunity, when they promise you a new life, when they remind you of all the ways I've manipulated you, He touched my face gently. You might choose differently. I won't. He kissed me slowly, like he was trying to memorize the taste of my mouth. Then prove it, he said. The federal building was familiar territory that felt like foreign soil now. Everything about the space, the fluorescent lights, the plastic chairs, the smell of institutional coffee felt like a world I'd rejected so completely that returning to it was almost painful. They set me up in an interview room with Chen, who had the decency to look uncomfortable about what she was about to ask. They want you to testify about what you've witnessed, Chen said. The violence, the business operations, any statements Caruso made about criminal activity. I won't do it, I said. You might not have a choice. We have evidence that you've been in his company during times when crimes were being planned or executed. We can place you at locations where illegal activity was happening. Then charge me, I said. I was complicit. I knew what was happening. I accepted it. Charge me instead of asking me to testify. Chen's expression shifted to something almost pitying. You understand what you're doing? You're choosing a known criminal over your freedom. I'm not choosing him over my freedom, I replied. I'm choosing my freedom, which is the freedom to make this decision. This is trauma bonding, Chen said. You've been isolated, manipulated, and assaulted by someone with significant power over you. You're experiencing, don't. My voice was quiet but absolute. Don't tell me what I'm experiencing. I know what I'm experiencing. I'm experiencing the fact that the only person who ever protected me instead of using me is the man you're trying to convince me to betray. I'm experiencing the fact that I was invisible and he made me visible. I'm experiencing the fact that he showed me exactly who he was and didn't ask me to pretend I didn't know. Chen set down her coffee. The maximum penalty for refusing to testify is contempt of court. You'll go to prison, Sophia. You understand that? I understand, I said. I'm still not testifying. The trial took 3 months to prepare and 3 weeks to complete. I was brought to the courthouse under guard, and the prosecution tried its best to break me. There were questions designed to trigger fear, questions designed to make me reconsider, questions designed to make me seem complicit in murder. Through all of it, I didn't break. And when the judge asked me directly before the entire courtroom, with Dante sitting at the defense table and Chen sitting among the prosecution, whether I would testify to crimes I'd witnessed, I looked at the judge and said no. I refused on grounds of personal conviction and refused to elaborate. The judge was not happy. There were charges filed against me for contempt, but the conviction never stuck because I did something smart. I hired an excellent lawyer, and that lawyer argued that forcing testimony from someone who had a personal relationship to the defendant would be constitutionally questionable. That person's testimony would be considered coerced, and therefore inadmissible. The case became so complicated that the prosecution eventually let it drop, and Dante was acquitted on the major charges. They still had evidence on some of the lesser crimes, enough to pressure him into a plea deal. He took a prison sentence 5 years, with the understanding that his organization would continue operating under new management while he was inside. The night before he was supposed to begin his sentence, we lay in the darkness of his bedroom for the last time. Thank you, he said simply. For what? For proving you were right about me? For proving you were right about yourself, he corrected. You were never meant to be invisible, Sophia. You were always meant to choose who to be visible for. You chose me. That's everything. I'll wait for you, I said. I know you will. His arm tightened around me. But I need you to do something while I'm gone. What? I need you to live, not just exist, not just wait. I need you to read and study and become the woman you're supposed to be. I need you to take what I've taught you about power and art and history, and I need you to build something with it. I don't want to leave. You won't be leaving. You'll be building a place for me to come back to. He paused. I also need you to understand that this separation is part of the test too. This is where we find out if what we have is real, or if it was only real in the context of constant proximity. It's real, I said. Then you'll be waiting when I get out, he replied. It wasn't a question. The morning they took him away, I held his hands through the final goodbye, and he kissed my forehead. 5 years is a long time, he said. If you change your mind, if you decide, I won't change my mind. He smiled, and there was something almost tender in it. No, you won't. That's why you're the only person I've ever truly trusted. Time moved differently when I was waiting. The first year, I spent most of my energy settling into the life Dante had left behind. The apartment became fully mine. I decorated it, filled it with my books and my research, turned it into a space that reflected who I was becoming rather than who I'd been. I also took his advice and built something. Working with the legitimate side of Caruso's art business, I developed expertise in authentication and provenance research. I worked with museums, helped track stolen pieces, and slowly gained a reputation as someone who understood not just the art, but the history behind the obsession to possess it. Dante had been right. The work filled something in me that invisibility had hollowed out. I visited him once a month. The prison was minimum security, something his resources and careful lawyers had arranged, and the visiting room was civilized. We sat across from each other, and he watched me the way he always had, cataloging changes, reading my face like it was a text he was committed to understanding completely. "You're different," he said on my 7th visit, as if noticing it for the first time despite seeing the difference accumulate monthly. "Better?" I asked. "No, just different. More yourself." He paused. "Are you happy?" The question was specific. Not, "Are you okay?" or "Are you managing?" but "Are you happy?" "Mostly," I said. "I'm busy. I'm building something. I'm learning. I have a purpose." "And us? Are you happy about us?" I couldn't lie to him, even if I'd wanted to. "Not after everything." "I miss you," I said. "But not in a way that hurts exactly. It's more like a phantom limb. I can feel the shape of where you should be." "That's good," he said. "That means what we have is real, not just a reaction to proximity and danger." In the 4th year, something changed in the larger world. There was a shift in Dante's organization, a restructuring that I wasn't privy to, but that I could feel through the careful conversations of the men who moved through the legitimate operations. And then, 6 months before his release date, I was visited by 2 people I'd never met. They came to my apartment, and they had Dante's authority written all over them. "We need you to understand something," the woman said. Her name was Rosalind, and she had the air of someone who'd made very hard decisions. "There's going to be a problem when Dante gets out. A threat that's been building while he's inside." "What kind of threat?" I asked. "The kind that requires him to make choices that might not include keeping you safe," the man Marcus replied. "His organization has changed. There are people in positions of power now who were promoted by necessity, and some of them see the original structure as a limitation rather than a hierarchy." "A mutiny," I said. "Essentially," Rosalind confirmed. "When he comes out, he'll have to consolidate power. That means it gets violent again. And it means you might become a liability because people will know that's the way to get to him." "So what are you telling me?" I asked. "To leave? To run?" "We're telling you to prepare," Marcus said. "Dante will ask you to hide, probably, or to disappear temporarily. And you need to understand that it's not because he doesn't trust you. It's because he has to make decisions about violence without worrying about you being collateral damage." "Will he survive it?" I asked. "Almost certainly," Rosalind said. "Dante's never been seriously threatened, because he's always been smarter than everyone else. But 5 years in prison means 5 years of not being fully in control. It means the board has shifted. When Dante called me, he was allowed phone calls now. A privilege granted by guards who understood who he really was. He confirmed everything they'd said, though with more delicacy. "I need you to go away for a while," he said. 6 months, maybe a year. Somewhere I can't reach you easily. Somewhere it would be difficult for anyone to use you against me." "Where?" I asked. "Wherever you want. There's money. There are resources. Choose somewhere that makes you happy, and go live there while I handle some business that's gotten complicated." "How long?" I asked. "Until I call and tell you it's safe to come home." I left 3 weeks after he was released. He'd handled the restructuring quickly and violently, exactly as I'd been promised. The news reported the deaths of 2 prominent crime figures. Nobody connected them to Dante because he was too smart to be connected. I went to Italy. Not Rome, where the tourists congregate, but to the Italian Lakes region where my father had done research on Renaissance villas. I rented a house near Lake Como and spent 6 months reading, studying, and occasionally doing authentication work remotely. It was peaceful. It was beautiful. It was exactly the life I could have had if I'd never met Dante, and I hated it. I called him after 4 months. "I want to come back," I said. There was silence on the line, and then his voice came through, careful and controlled. "It's not safe yet." "I don't care," I replied. "I don't want this life. I want the other one. I want you. You want the idea of me," he said. "You want what we had before. But it's never exactly the same after blood's been spilled and violence has been weathered." "I know," I said. "I want that version too." Another silence. Then, "Come home." I arrived back in Chicago on a Wednesday evening in April. The city was warming into spring, and the lakefront was beginning to turn green. Dante was waiting in the apartment. He looked older, prison-age's people, but when he saw me, something shifted in his expression that made him look almost vulnerable. "You came back," he said. "I never really left," I replied. We didn't touch immediately. We stood across from the living room, just looking at each other, trying to reconcile the people we'd been with, the people we'd become. "People are going to try to use you," he said finally. "People I've made enemies of. People who understand now that you matter to me." "Then we protect each other," I replied. "I'm not helpless, Dante. I'm not someone to be protected. I'm someone to be partnered with. That's dangerous," he said. "So am I." The small smile he gave me was almost sad. "Yes, you are. I taught you to be." He crossed the room, and his hand came up to my face, tracing the line of my cheekbone like he was confirming I was real. "I never stopped thinking about you," he said. 5 years, and every single day I thought about you. I thought about this moment. "And now?" I asked softly. "Now I'm going to marry you," he said simply. "Not because I need to claim you, you've always been mine, but because I want everyone to understand that you chose me, and I chose you, and we're going to spend the rest of our lives making that choice regardless of what happens." "That sounds very public," I said. "It is. Very public, very expensive, very beautiful. I'm going to parade you in front of everyone who might think of using you against me, so they understand the cost of that decision." "That's very possessive," I observed. "Yes," he agreed, "but you like possessive." He kissed me then, and it was different from any kiss before. Slower, more certain, like he was confirming something he'd always known. The wedding happened 2 months later, in a private garden that Dante owned. The guest list was approximately 200 people, most of whom I didn't recognize, but whose presence meant something in the careful architecture of power that he inhabited. I wore white because I found it funny, and because Dante's smile when he saw me walk down the aisle told me he found it funny too. During the reception, a man I vaguely recognized as connected to a rival family approached us. "Congratulations," he said. The word was sincere, which meant it was a message. Dante had won. The restructuring was complete. The power was consolidated. "Thank you," I replied. Dante simply nodded, his hand on my lower back a statement of absolute ownership. Later, in the privacy of the suite Dante had arranged for us, he held me and told me about the bodies that had been part of consolidating power. 3 dead, 1 still in hiding, a careful restructuring that had taken months and had involved calls to distant allies I would never meet. "Do you hate me for it?" he asked. "No," I said. "Do you hate me for not leaving when I had the chance?" "Never." We fell asleep, tangled together, and for the first time since the day I'd dialed the FBI, I didn't dream about running. Epilogue. 1 year later, I was organizing a major art exhibition on Renaissance provenance when Chen showed up at my office. The bureau had upgraded her, apparently. New title, new authority, new weariness. "We have a problem," she said, closing the door behind her. "Of course you do," I replied. I didn't look up from the catalog I was reviewing. The bureau always has problems. One of the people Dante's organization eliminated last year, the one who's still in hiding, he's in contact with foreign interests who want Dante's operation dissolved. They're offering to help him resurface if he cooperates. "And you're telling me this why?" I asked. "Because I thought you should know. Because I wanted you to understand that your husband isn't as secure as he seems." I set down the catalog and looked at her directly. "Chen, I've known for 3 years that my husband's operation is a target. I've known that people would come for him, and that he would deal with them. I've made my peace with that. I paused. And I've also made myself into someone who's difficult to use against him. I have security, resources, and knowledge. I'm not the liability you think I am. That's not what I think, Chen said quietly. I think you're fully aware of what you're doing. And I think you've chosen this. I have, I agreed. After she left, I called Dante and told him about the threat. He listened without interrupting, and when I was finished, he simply said, I know. How long have you known? Since it started forming, 2 months ago. And you didn't tell me? Because you were happy building the exhibition, and because I can handle this. But I could help, I said. There was a pause on the line, and then his voice came through, soft and certain. You already are, by being there, by being mine, by being willing to stay. He paused. That's all the help I need. After we hung up, I returned to the exhibition, to the careful work of authenticating beauty and understanding obsession. The city outside my window continued its existence, full of people living normal lives, making normal choices. And somewhere in that city, my husband was making the kinds of choices that required violence, isolation, and the kind of power that came from being willing to burn the world. I wasn't afraid of what was coming. Not anymore. I'd made my choice years ago, on the day I dialed the FBI from a restaurant, and understood that some kinds of freedom require surrendering to someone who understands what it means to keep you safe. The phone rang once more that evening. This time it was news that the person in hiding had made a deal, but not with the foreign interests. With Dante. They'd negotiated, and a solution had been found that didn't require more blood. It was the kind of intelligence that would have mattered to the Bureau. I didn't call them. Instead, I went home to wait for my husband, knowing that he would arrive with blood on his hands, knowing that I would run him a bath and listen to him explain the calculus of power, knowing that I would choose him again and again and again, because that's what it meant to stop running. It meant choosing someone so completely that there was no longer any distance between trust and danger, between love and obsession, between the woman I'd been and the woman I'd become. I was Sophia Caruso now, and I'd